This is the second event in a four-part series that we are hosting together with the generous support of ANZ across Asia. We recently held an event in Singapore, now obviously Hong Kong, and then we have Jakarta and Shanghai to come between now and the end of the year. The idea of these events, as is the idea of Advance, is to connect you with each other, to connect people who have an interest and a connection with Australia with each other, and also to connect you back with Australia.
Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's conversation. We want to make it more of a conversation rather than a discussion, but the point that we'll be talking about tonight is pretty much how and why women are reaching higher levels of success in the business world in Asia as opposed to places like Australia.
The biggest learning for me is not just my identity as a woman in business, but it's also as an Australian, and I think there's a lot of advantages for Australians in business globally.
So on behalf of ANZ, very, very pleased to sponsor this and to support Advance. I've actually snuck in. I'm a Kiwi. I'm a New Zealander, so sure. I just the free wine and I've kind of spent my life surrounded by pretty impressive, pretty powerful women, and yet through my career I still see this disparity in the corporate world at the top level. So I'm sort of intrigued by that. I've got some views which I'm sure we'll get to. I'm not sure it's a glass ceiling. I actually think it's uneven stairs. That's my view.
As an Australian, I think you automatically feel welcomed by a lot of the expats, and in Hong Kong in particular, it's a very welcoming city, I think, amongst the Asian cities. And I suppose there was a consciousness that there were a lot of senior women here. It wasn't something that jumped out at me, but I also felt very comfortable coming into the environment. And we have, at Telstra in Australia, a large number of senior women in the business. So from Telstra's perspective, it wasn't unusual at all.
I think it's a combination of a few factors. I haven't been in Australia for about 15 years. I worked in the US before I came here. I think one of the facts that we've got to address is there's just more senior jobs here. When I first went to work in the IT industry, it can't have been 20 years ago. Yeah, it was five and a little bit. Most of the multinationals had their headquarters in Australia because the time zone worked better with the US and there was the language benefit. And over time, because of tax incentives and growth, where the growth opportunities are, those headquarters have moved out of Australia into Hong Kong, but most likely into Singapore. And the impact that that's had is that the senior jobs are moving out of Australia. Australian women have an opportunity in Asia because we're not held back by the gender limitations that I think Asian women are held back on, that expectation around what they can be doing with the family, what they should be doing with the family.
I think there's a lot of layers. There's certainly a historic element too. I mean, if you think about even, I guess, emerged or developed Asian countries, Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, there's very, the success has been very recent, in the last generation or two. So there's a lot of cultural pressure here around getting ahead and around doing well that maybe we don't necessarily have in New Zealand and Australia.
I do come from a corporate background, so I was very excited when we could pay the rent for the very first time, and since then we've moved onwards and upwards and have probably quadrupled our business year on year. And but it's not without we haven't been able to do that with conventional thinking. And in fact, I would never have gone down this pathway if we were going to do something that was just sort of a traditional retail approach.
I think so. And I think from my experience, my Australian-ness has been more of an advantage than my female-ness has been a disadvantage. And Mark and I were talking earlier, and I was trying to think about what's the root cause of that, why is that? And I think because in Australia we don't have we have to do everything, right? You're master of nothing, but you're responsible for everything, and you have to have a very broad set of skills, and you just have to get on and do it. Your marketing department isn't 50 deep, it's maybe one or two of you, and you're both the event coordinator and the guest speaker, right? You're everything. And I think that the size of business in Australia gives you that skill set. And so when you go to other markets that that initiative and that willingness to just get on and do stuff really, I think, gives you an advantage. I've certainly seen it in my organisation.
There's a lot of ANZers here tonight who are non-Australian or Australasian, and we've done a lot of research, certainly with interview feedback when candidates join, what attracts them to the ANZ brand in Asia. And there is a feeling that there's a sort of an Australasian culture around meritocracy rather than hierarchy.
People all day, every day, I think the thing that they always, the feedback is always that Australians are actually creative, they're fun to work with, and they're easy to work with.
There were a lot of the Australianness that came out in that study, which in the UK and European market was quite a positive thing in regards to us being quite direct, a fairly dynamic nation, a sense of reliability, they say what they do, etc. And I think that was more resonating for us in the UK than what it is here, because the directness is something that actually you need to tone down quite a lot. And particularly for women in business, I mean, to put your hand out and shake a gentleman's hand in Thailand is something you don't do, whereas anywhere in pretty much all of Europe you could do that. So that Australian directness is something that we really need to temper quite a bit, whereas some of the other components around the dynamism, etc., is quite exciting for people, and they see us as a country, as you say, that's fun and interesting.
Let's just speak about gender, obviously, given the theme of the evening, a real recognition that it's just sheer lunacy to rule out a large chunk of your population. It's like saying all left-handed people, please leave the room.
For me, in Asia, after having been, and I guess maybe we're a fairly global organisation, is that you're not exposed to as many key things unless maybe you're an Australian headquartered operations. You're going to get much more of the exposure across different skill sets that they're looking for, and so that becomes a bit of an issue that I see certainly for people in our organisation who have only been in Asia. They just don't get access to some of the projects, to some of the experience, to go before the investment committee, to do all of those things. So I don't think that's necessarily a female problem. I think that's a global kind of work scale issue that I don't know how to resolve for Asia, and I was talking about that from how do we do that from a development perspective.
Women will always say they were successful because they were lucky. And men will say, yes, I did a really good job, I've got a great skill set, I am really great. And so she puts it back on women and says, you own it, sister. It's up to you to lean in. If you want that, you lean forward and you go after it in the way that, and think of yourself in a different way. Don't think that a senior job necessarily means that it's going to have a negative impact on your family life. It might mean that you actually have more control. So don't let that hold you back.
I haven't been in the corporate world in Australia for 5 years, but when I was there, I think that the issue for women was other women. It was so competitive, and it was a dog-eat-dog world. And in Asia, I think, and particularly in Hong Kong, the women I meet, we're all A-type women here. You don't really survive in Asia unless you are. But there's a fraternity, and that fraternity actually helps people. We network, we get on, and I find that's the biggest difference for me between leaving Australia and coming here is more the women versus other women. Attitude has changed completely.
I think it's much better to say, have a look at that, and that's what we're aspiring to, and it's regardless of gender. If you've got someone, you think some of the strong female leaders at work, they're inspirational, whether you're a male or a female. But for females, hopefully they can see that, you can head off, you can have kids, have a family, still come ripping back into it. And it's up to the organisation to flex itself, to change itself structurally so that, what's the phrase? Parental leave doesn't become a career killer. They're kind of banked off for 2, 3, 4 years, and then, So how do we keep those people engaged and retained? How do we share all the cases that are going on, the best practice, how do we keep them up to speed so they don't feel like they're just in a kind of a side tributary for that period?
There's a lot more impact we can make in terms of females and diversity if we really focus on sponsorship more so than mentoring. So who's at that top table that knows you, that will advocate for you? And an area where men have a natural advantage still, I think, is, you know, when you're in the lift and you can talk to the senior executive about the cricket scores or who your favourite AFL football team is. You know, you can slip off for a beer with those top execs.
And because of the point you made before about domestic help, it's affordable and easy to do, whereas in Australia, you've got to change the whole setup of the company in order to allow people to come back and be able to afford to come back. So it's often only the women that are in reasonably successful jobs to start with, that are being paid well, that can actually afford to go back into the workforce, because otherwise they're just taking their salary and handing it over to the daycare centre. So that's where the difference is, I suppose, between Australia and here in that regard.
I think Cheryl Sandberg in her book highlights some of the things as women that we do to hold ourselves back, but I think diversity is all on us. We have whether it's, you know, including people in your work group or in your hiring practices, whatever it is, I think we all need to take responsibility for creating a diversified workforce, because that's who our customer base is. And the only way we're truly going to be customer focused and meet our customers' needs is to make sure that our organisation is talking to our customers the way they want to be spoken to and representative of the way our customers are.
I hope everyone else has been enlightened in some way about women in top jobs. Thank you.
If you're interested in coming to any more of these events across Asia, as I said, we have one in Jakarta scheduled and one in Shanghai, so come and see me if you'd like to know more about those. We hope this will become a quarterly fixture next year as well, that we'll have an event across Asia somewhere, including Hong Kong, with these kinds of themes. If you'd like to get more involved in advance in any way here in Hong Kong, please come and see me. So that's it for now for me. Thank you all again very much for coming. Thank you to ANZ again for your support and for the stats. And thanks very much to Salon 10, this fantastic venue, for hosting us this evening. There's plenty of canapes left, so please eat, drink and be merry and enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you.